I get questions about camera and flash settings all the time, and I'm okay with that. Some photographers are not so okay with it. They're gonna say stuff like, hey man, my settings don't matter unless you have the exact same environment and lighting gear and situation. My settings are not going to apply to what you're trying to do. Learn the exposure triangle, they say. And you know, in a sense, they're right. They have a point. You should know the fundamentals. You should know the basics of exposure and a little bit of lighting basics, before you get into complicated lighting setups. Like I used to get questions about the lighting setups that I demonstrated in some of my instructional ebooks. And people wanted to know, like exactly the lens that I was using, the f-stop, the distance between me and the model, the distance between the lights and the model, the actual power settings of each light, the modifiers I was using, the size of the modifiers, all these very specific questions. Now, to an experienced photographer, from their point of view, when people ask questions like that, you might get a little frustrated because it might seem like the people who are asking these questions haven't even bothered to learn enough to know that these are the wrong questions to be asking. But as someone who likes to help people learn stuff, I've come to look at this at these questions from the other side. Look, people learn in different ways. Some read to learn, some watch, like in these videos, or they watch people demonstrate live. And some will totally disregard experts' advice and they just want to experiment and practice on their own. And some want to emulate and copy someone else's work. And let me tell you, all of these ways of approaching learning will work. Now, as far as emulating or copying another photographer's work, hey, musicians do this. They do this. That's one of the ways that they learn. That method of learning does work. It's instructive. When you're trying to reproduce or replicate someone else's work, you're going to have successes, you're going to have failures, and you're going to learn from all of it. As long as you take what is going wrong and take what's going right and just keep building upon it. And what you learn through that process is going to help in your future learning too. So it all builds upon itself. And by the way, side note, I don't want you to get discouraged if you're in that mode of learning where you want to sort of replicate other people's work. I don't want you to get too discouraged when you do that because it actually is a lot harder, in my opinion, and other people have said this too, it's a lot harder to try to reproduce the look of good lighting in someone else's image than it is just to create good lighting on your own. And I think an analogy to that might be for a musician, like let's say for a guitar player, if they're trying to reproduce or copy another person's amazing lead solo in a song, it's going to be pretty difficult for them at times because the person who originally came up with that amazing lead, it might have just flowed through them. There might not have been a lot of thought in that process. And then, once they got into the studio and they tweaked it, things got a little cleaner. But originally, that whole thing just flowed out of them. That can be the same with lighting. Lighting can be created organically almost, as you're building it up. And then, once you do it, even the photographer who did a particular lighting setup may not be able to reproduce his own work quite the same way the next time. So anyway, I'm just throwing that in to let you know that it's not always easy to create something amazing, especially if it's complex. To recreate it, it's not always easy. But hey, trying can be very instructive. So if you see an image that you really like and you get the specifics of what went into creating that image, is it really going to help you? I mean, maybe. Someone asked me in the comments in a video that I posted recently, they were asking me about the specifics of my cross lighting setup. And let me just go ahead and read my response for you because I think this fits in with what we're talking about. My response is this. For me, the ratio and position of the cross light, rim light, or hair light is very dependent on the situation. For example, what kind of coverage do I need from top to bottom or from across? And how does it look against the tone of the skin or the color of the hair? I go on to say it's like most things with lighting, you can have a starting point, but it's rarely the final recipe. I like to use these analogies. In this case, it's soup. I say, like, if you're making soup with different ingredients all the time, it's not always the same soup recipe. If you like to mix ingredients around, you have to add salt according to taste. With lighting, there are always test shots because you never know it's good until it's good. And that's true. Professional photographers, they set up their lights and it's just not automatically going to work all the time. They set up their lights, they take test shots, and they have to tweak the settings a little bit. They may move a different subject into position and they may find that they have to tweak those settings again. So everything doesn't necessarily stay static, even from, when you've got your lighting set up the way that you want it. You might have to make adjustments. All right, so we get back to what we were talking about, and you might say, so Ed, I still want to know what your flash settings are. All right, this might not be what you want to hear, but the right answer is probably I use the flash settings that are necessary for the type of exposure that I want, depth of field, mood, and other effects, whether or not I want the background to appear a certain way. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. So there's no one right answer as far as what lighting settings to use. And there's no one specific recipe that I would call my own. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have certain starting points for different lighting scenarios that I use. I do. And these have come about they've just evolved sort of organically through the way that I work and the looks that I like to get. And a lot of it's dependent upon the gear. All right, so for example, a basic head and shoulders portrait. I'm usually going to start with a speed light and a modifier like a shoot-through umbrella or a medium-sized softbox. I'm going to place that at a 45-45 angle to my subject. I like using an 85mm lens at f4, shutter speed at or slightly below the camera's flash sync speed, the ISO between 100 and 200. The key light is maybe an 1/8 power for the speed light that I'm using. A rim or hair light might be a 1/4 power, which is, that's a sort of a rule of thumb with me. I'll use a rim or a kicker about twice the power as my key light. And I take test shots. I look at the test shots and I adjust as necessary. Will those settings work for you? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, it's dependent upon gear and distances and things like that. So, like for example, a 1600 watt strobe, if you use that at an 1/8 power, it's probably not going to give you the right results with the camera settings that I normally start off with, right? It's just way more powerful than a speed light. So it depends on the modifiers you're using, the distances between the lights and the model. It depends on things like your f-stop. You're gonna pick an f-stop that gives you the kind of depth of field that you're looking for in an image. You're going to use a shutter speed, maybe a slower shutter speed than your camera's flash sync speed, if you want to record more ambient light in the shot. Look, things are always in flux, even from moment to moment in a studio setup. And that's why photographers might feel like the answers that they give to you for questions regarding the flash power settings and camera settings, they might feel that the answers are not going to even be meaningful to you. But look, if somebody does give you their specific settings for a shot that you really like, you can start there. Again, don't be discouraged if you can't reproduce the look based on those settings, because you're probably using different gear and there's other things that will factor into whether or not those settings will work. So don't be discouraged, just use it as a starting point and build from there. Tweak things until you get a look that you really like. You can learn a lot that way. You're going to learn the most by doing and by practicing and experimenting. Now me, I'm always up for answering your questions about lighting. The answers might not be helpful, but we can always try, right? Now I know you want to learn how to do this stuff. I know you want to learn really good lighting techniques. The best way to get started is by learning the fundamentals of exposure and lighting. Now I'm going to include a couple of links in the video description below. These are really going to help you when it comes to the basics. So go ahead and check that out. And hey, if this video has helped you out at all, if it sheds some light on the topic, or if you just like this video or some of the other videos that I do, go ahead and click subscribe. I'd like to see you back here. If you like this video in particular, give me a thumbs up by clicking the like button, and go ahead and leave me a comment. I love reading your comments. I think that's about it for today, guys. I'll see you next time.